Okay, it's super easy.
Okay.
You trust me with? your-
I try, of course. I've got no secrets worth telling. Cuando tú digas, no me voy.
I don't know, it's like stuck or something. I don't know.
Oh. Body to you.
Oh, wait, there it is.
So no, that's very appropriate.
It's the heaviest thing I had.
So, Maria, Genesis. So super. ¿Cómo se llama ese compañero ahí?
Takes 4 of us to figure out.
I'm trying to remember most of the times I think I lost part of my memory when I had COVID.
Yeah.
I don't know about you all, but my memory.
Yeah, it feels also hard for me to know, it's like such a small. Like in every direction all the time.
It's what Bernard Stiegler talks about. Bernard was a guy who spent time, the French philosopher, who spent a lot of time. Well, he was incarcerated for 2 years, and he discovered philosophy, became a philosopher, and he would talk about this question of available brain space. That part of capitalism now is to actually monetize your brain space. So it's one of these interesting things where in traditional Marxist understandings of the development of value, you extract from people's bodily power, living labor power, Marx calls it, and actually and you get paid wages, right? So there's chattel slavery and there's wage slavery, and with the introduction of these technologies, every time you do something like something, they extract value. So we're in a period historically where surplus value is being extracted from people, but they're not getting wages. So it's a much more violent form of capitalism, right? It's hyper extractive. So it's anything you do with like Facebook, Insta, they're all based upon dynasty politics, right? Partial reinforcement, you're looking for the likes. And once you get so acclimated to the likes, then in fact what happens is that you're constantly looking at it. And any of us, if you lose your cell phone for a week, what happens to you? Right. And it's interesting because now they're socializing young people and everybody to have their surplus value extracted from their choices without any wages, which is part of the whole idea of jobless. So I just wanted to start off with that. Happy Christmas. We're on.
All right.
Hello, hello. All right, everybody, welcome to Rearte Centro Literario. I'm Viva Padilla. I'm the owner of the store. We've been here for 3 years, and we're happy to welcome our latest speaker, Edgar Ribera Colon, who I just met recently, and we just kind of hit it off, and he was like, all right, maybe I should do something in your store. And so I kind of made him do it. Because he was like, yeah, maybe I should. And I was like, no, you're going to. And he's like, oh man, okay, I guess this is what I signed up for. So I was like, all right. So we set the date and there was a lot of interest in it. So I'm happy to see your faces here today to get into this teach-in, this discussion with Edgar and Palestine. As you know, there's the atrocities committed against Palestine are still going on. And today was a pretty difficult day in seeing some of the footage that just came out of Palestinians being pretty much destroyed by drones. And so I'm kind of like going into this teaching, just kind of keeping the people that have passed away and the people that are suffering in mind. And just never forgetting that this is not a teaching to theorize or to kind of like intellectually masturbate or in some way. This is to really kind of like try to gain an understanding in a way that we can ourselves incorporate into our own lives and influence other people to bring some more awareness and try to do what we can to make sure that the future generations also see that in this time that we're living in, we did what we could, that we were here and that we were present and that we did what we could with the means that we had. And so this teaching is very important for that, because even though we can't necessarily go there and physically stop things, we can at least say that we were here and we were fighting against it in our own way, even if it doesn't feel like we are. So with that being said, I'm gonna introduce Edgar with a formal bio, because that's what we do here. Edgar Ribera Colon, PhD, a medical anthropologist. He wrote this in his bio. Is clinical assistant professor of medical education at the University of Southern California's Keck School of Medicine. He teaches courses on health justice and the history of racism in medicine. Reverend Dr. Rivera Colon is an ordained minister in the Fellowship of Affirming Ministries' mission to be a social movement chaplain in Los Angeles, which I made him do today. His present book project is Love Comes in Knots, Postcards from the Dead. He hosts a podcast about radical politics and spirituality called Karl Marx 8 Mile Field Notes. And so with that, let's give him a round of applause, please.
For inviting me, and I just want folks to take a look around. This is a liberated zone. It's an autonomous zone. Viva has been part of what we call in Latin America as protagonista, the person who's been protagonizing this struggle to keep this space, the literary space, cultural space, a poetic space, a space, the spiritual conversations, and then all kinds of revolutionary conversations. So I ask you just, since I'm a minister, I'm gonna ask you for a donation. And the donation will be, if you have books, please donate them to Realte. If you want to make a donation, I'm sure there is a place in the website to do that, because we have to keep these spaces open, right? And part of the challenge that we're all in now is how do we create structures that we control that will form us for what's happening now, but also what's going to happen in the future, right? And I just want to start off with that recognition that this space was built out of a love and a hope, and that we should contribute to it as part of our space, right? And as our society collapses, and it's collapsing right before our eyes, we need to create more and more spaces like this, where people can drink intellectually, emotionally, spiritually, affectively, waters of healing and hope and resistance, right? It may not fall to us to be a revolutionary generation. I actually think that's going to happen in the global south, right? But it is to our task, right, to resist as we can in human, and as we're called to do it, right? Like not everyone's called to do the same thing, thank God, right? Because I'd be a lousy engineer, right? But we are called to do something. And I'm bringing you great greetings from the Fellowship of Affirming Ministry, a Black and Latinx LGBTQ church, totally inclusive, very diverse, founded in Oakland by one of our founding bishops, Bishop Yvette Flunder, and of course, William Barber was one of our bishops. And one of the things we do in the fellowship is, make sure that people know that we're not a church, we're a movement. We're not a denomination, we're a movement. And if you're in movement, we're with you. And so I just want to say that's what I'm here for. And I thank you, Viva, for giving me the opportunity to do this. So I'm going to tell you a little story, because I'm an anthropologist, we like to do that. And tell you this, almost my spiritual autobiography, and then go to this question of liberation theology, and then go to Palestine. first thing we should say about Palestine is Christians invented Zionism in many ways, right? And that Christian Zionism predates political Zionism, right? Or Jewish Zionism. So we should just start there, right? And that a lot of the theologies that Christians have articulated around what we call the Holy Land are deeply anti-Palestinian, right? And pro-Zionist. If you want to read a passage from the Hebrew scripture that sort of shows you what settled colonialism is, its ideology in a spiritual and a theological form, read the book of Joshua. Because in the book of Joshua, you see the settled colonial idea, okay? So let's begin with me. I grew up working class, Puerto Rican, not from LA, from Jersey City. And my parents were factory workers. My mom was a garment worker. My father was working in a factory. And I grew up basically in a Puerto Rican, Black, Cuban, Dominican. And then there was these other folks who were working class as we were, poor as we were. Italians, Irish, Polish, what they used to call the white ethnics, right? Back in the day. And I got a scholarship to go to a Jesuit school. And for 10 years, I was involved in Jesuit education in the sense of I was being trained, or I was actually a member of the Jesuit order. So from the age of 13 to 23, I was involved with the Jesuits. They tried to brainwash me to be white. It didn't work because white folks will tell you you're not white, right? Even if you're light skinned, right? So I had an incredible education with the Jesuits, and I had time to spend in Central America in 86 and 87 in El Salvador and in Nicaragua. And that's when I was really exposed to the practice of liberation theology, not just the theory, but the actual what it was, right? Like the base communities, the pastoral outreach, and what it meant for Salvadorans to resist US sponsored, basically killing people left and right, And in Nicaragua, what it meant for Christians to collaborate with a project of national liberation, which was the Sandinista Front at the time. The Sandinista Front has changed a lot, right? But at that time, they were into national liberation. So that experience, do you ever have that experience where, you make a decision and you just realize, oh, I just made a decision, right? That's what happened to me. I was coming in the back of a pickup truck with a bunch of people from Matiguas in the north of Nicaragua to Managua, and all of a sudden it hit me, I'm not going to be a Jesuit next year. I'm leaving the order, right? And I think what happened to me was that I began to identify with the Central Americans, and I began to ask myself, why do I identify with these people so much? And one of the Nicaraguans said to me, Marvin Ortega, a very cynical Marxist-Leninist who I still love to this day, he said to me, Edgar, you're Puerto Rican. Right? And that's when I began to really think about leaving the order. And I left the order after my 5th year in it, and spent a year in a peace community of plowshares activists. Elmer Moss was there, and I was part of the Catholic left still. And then went back to the Bronx, where I had worked and studied as a Jesuit, and stayed there for the next 25 years in the South Bronx, working with organizers. And again, these were all people who had been influenced by liberation theology. They wanted the church and faith communities to be centered in creating better conditions in the Bronx. I became an atheist, a Marxist-Leninist in good Puerto Rican fashion, and was part of the Puerto Rican National Liberation Movement, the armed wing of the movement, actually. And as time went on, I saw the limits of that, and I came out, became part of the LGBTQ liberation movement, thank God for that. And then I really burnt out on community work in the South Bronx. So I did a thing you shouldn't do when you're burnt out on community work. I went to get a PhD in anthropology, which is what I did. And I was the worst graduate student in the world. So if you're a bad graduate student, got nothing on me, because I was pretty bad. I spent 10 years trying to get my dissertation, but I dropped out for 3 years, and I did community research in something called the house ballroom scene, which is a Black and Latinx LGBTQ community that is both a kinship system and a dance performance circuit. It's famous now because that program closed, but it's really about resistance, that community, in lots of ways. And I got involved with the community, and then I realized this is a community that someone should do research on, and then I went back and finished my PhD, right? And so I continue to do that work. I got involved in public health. I got involved in something called narrative medicine. I'm happy to do a session on narrative medicine one of these days. And through a series of events, my sister met this beautiful Mexican woman from Boyle Heights, and I was helping to raise my nieces and in Jersey City, and my neighborhood had been gentrified. So I came to LA. I've been here 4 years, and luckily I got a job at USC, and I became an ordained minister. Now, that's the story, right? That's sort of or encinita, right? I'm just the surface story of a spiritual autobiography. All of it is about communities in struggle. It wasn't my spiritual journey. It was learning to be with collectives of people of faith who were resisting on many levels, right? And I think that liberation theology begins when people begin to reflect on their praxis in faith in community, right? And historically, there are many forms of liberation theology. Here in the United States, one of the mainstreams of liberation theology is the Black church, actually, right? It's one of the foundations of it. And their rearticulation of the Exodus story as a form of liberation theology, right? For those who are interested, you can read James Cone's books on, Black theology and Black liberation theology. Now, Latin American liberation theology, I won't go into the whole history, but I can say this, right? That after World War II, right, the United States has a bit of a problem, right? It's conquered the whole world with its imperialism, right? Its land and infrastructure is not destroyed, as is the case in Japan, in Germany, in France, and Italy, right? And it has to develop a capitalist system, a global system, in order to arrest the Chinese Revolution and to contain the Soviet sort of system. At the same time, there's an incredible surge in national liberation movements in Latin America, in Africa, and in Asia, right? The Asian one that's most familiar to us post-World War II, of course, the Chinese Revolution, is actually the National Liberation of the Vietnamese people, National Liberation of the Vietnamese, right? And out of that context, right, the US poses alternatives, right? And most of those alternatives are not democratic, right? They're about capitalism. Out of that, in Latin America specifically, comes an attempt to have a democratic form of capitalism in Latin America through something called the Alliance for Progress, right? And by this time, people are beginning to see these struggles all over the world. The Cold War has initiated, and one of the problems the United States has in Europe is that the two strongest communist parties in Europe are the Italian Communist Party and the French Communist Party, and they fought the Nazis. So the United States has to contain them, right? It has to make sure that regimes that are friendly to it will maintain capitalism the way they understand it in US imperialism. So the people who begin to talk about liberation theology go to Europe, study in Europe, many of them, and begin to realize that there's something going on in Latin America in terms of the structures of poverty. It wasn't that God wanted people to be poor. It was that actually capitalism requires poverty. It requires misery. And as they started thinking about what people were doing on the ground, they began to articulate what we would call a liberation pastoral approach, creating communities, comunidades eclesiales de base, based communities, right? And reading the Bible in light of their actual conditions, refusing the whole move of, you're poor because God wills you to be poor. No, you're poor because it's a structure that a lot of people are making a lot of money off of, and there's land that's controlled by an elite, right? And that's why you're poor, right? And you can think about, for those of you how many of you are familiar with liberation theology? There's actually a liberation theologian in this room, I heard. All right, so, and he's hiding, he said, no, don't mention me. And But he's a North American liberation theologian, which is a different thing. It'd be good for you to maybe come up and talk a little bit about that, Eric. Don't worry, I'll force you in a minute. And so I think that what I would say is the essence of liberation theology is that it's reflection on the practice of communities of faith seeking to live under oppressive conditions and seeking a type of liberation, a whole liberation of the person, right? And it becomes famous. I can name a few. Gustavo Gutierrez is one. In certain ways, liberation philosophy, Maria Lagunes is another one. John Sobrino and the Jesuits who were martyred in El Salvador, Ignacio Ella Correa, Ignacio Martin Barro. There were a lot of people, right? And when we think about liberation theology, we should realize that there are many forms of it. There's womanist theology, which is centered on Black women in the church, right? There's liberation theologies that are focused on ecology, right? Eco-liberation theology. There's queer liberation theology. There's trans liberation theology. There's Latinx liberation theologies. There's Asian liberation theologies. So when we think about liberation theology, it's an approach, it's a method, right? And it's also a way of reading the scriptures, where you begin to understand that this guy, Jesus, is this Palestinian Jew in Roman-occupied Eastern Mediterranean, right? And we forget, that part of the world is part of Africa, right? It's an African religion in that sense. And that what we see in the reflections of liberation theology is an attempt to understand and read the scriptures from the perspective of the oppressed, right? And there are many terms that people use, like preferential option for the poor, that the church has to find that option, has to live that option, right? And also a critique of the church itself, right? The most radical of liberation theologians get thrown out of the church because they begin to question the Roman Catholic Church's hierarchical system. And remember, there's Protestant liberation theologies and Catholic liberation theologies, so we don't get confused. It's not just a Catholic thing. And right now, there are African liberation theologies and Asian liberation theologies. So I think what we're thinking about, or what we're trying to clarify as people interested in liberation theology, is what's the practical part of it? The practical part of it is the faith community, the living faith community, and its plans towards liberation, right? How many of you grew up in religious communities? Okay, all right. My condolences. Now, what were your experiences in those religious communities? What was it like? I'm a teacher, so I'm gonna ask questions.
Boring.
Boring, right?
Donuts.
Boring. So you were Catholic?
Yeah.
Okay, boring, yeah. Other religious traditions? Are you all ex-Catholics or Catholics? Yeah, it was boring. I was part of the Catholic Church and I found it boring. Yeah? Yeah? Catholic?
Yeah, that's Jewish, my mom's Catholic.
Okay, so
Boring in different ways.
boring in different ways, okay. Ecumenical boring. All right, so interfaith boring. All right, so look. I'm part of a Black church that comes out of the holiness tradition. And when I was ordained at the Holy Invocation Convocation this summer, people were being slain in the spirit, left and right. I'm like, what's happening, But actually, that's the vitality of a faith that's spirit-based, right? And I think with a lot of Catholics, it's sort of, every time, I haven't been to a Catholic mass in years, but the time I've gone, I'm like, this is sad. This is boring. This is like, not what I think the followers of Jesus should be like, right? So to get back to this question of liberation theology, let's think about Palestine, right? Right now, as we know, there's a genocide being committed. And that genocide is funded by US imperialism, right? And I'm always cautious when people say, we're doing that. It's the ruling class, right? They don't call your mom and dad and ask, well, should we support the Israelis in this? No, it's when it comes to what they call the national interest, there's no democratic input at all, right? And Israel itself, and this will be controversial for me to say, in the US, I guess, is a product of anti-Semitism. What do I mean by that? It's an externalization of the refusal of Europeans to confront their history of anti-Semitism. Right? It's literally outsourcing it to the Palestinian people. Right? And so let's make it personal a little bit. I lived in New York for many years, and every once in a while I go down to one of these neighborhoods that was like rich, Soho, and maybe I meet a friend, and then I would inevitably pass by parks with children. And it was always white kids, and the people who were taking care of them were people from the global south. They're either Filipina, or they were West Indian women, or African women, or Latin American women, right? And depending on the person, the kid was speaking Spanish to their nanny, or they're speaking some French to their nanny. It was a Haitian, let's say, or Francophone African, right? That's what elites do. They outsource their lives, the messy parts of their lives, to other people. Right? The United States has outsourced its fortress, imperial fortress, in Israel, right? And after the 1967 war, United States policymakers were very clear. Okay, we're going to support these Israelis to the hilt. Part of it will be that they will battle communist and Arab nationalist formations, right? So when people say you have to blame Hamas, Hamas is a product of US foreign policy. How so? The US made a decision in its own foreign policy debate. So you could go to Foreign Affairs, the magazine, and look at what they're saying, right? Especially in the 60s. They made a choice, right? They said, well, look, we have to contain communism and nationalism in all fronts. By nationalism, they meant any system of government where the products of the economy of the society were at least partially used for the benefit of the people of the country. That's it. They called it communism international. So you see pan-Arab nationalism emerging after World War II with someone named Nasser in Egypt. And the United States did all kinds of intelligence operations, supported the Israelis in order to do two things: destroy communism, right, in the Middle East, communist formations, and destroy nationalist formations, right? And when you do that, and you literally kill people, don't allow them any political space, guess who takes the space up later on? Islamicists, right? And Hamas created social service organizations, hospitals, to respond to the needs of the Palestinian people, right? So when we see, what we're seeing now is the result of US foreign policy. And what this author is talking about, and I really encourage everyone to read Decolonizing Palestine by Dr. Mitri Rahab, The Land, the People, and the Bible. And he's actually a theologian. It's a great book. It's written in direct style, right? And what he says is, we have to decolonize our understanding of Israel or Jerusalem specifically, as a biblical object, right? Let's be clear. In the Hebrew Bible, you see that the Israelites displaced the Canaanites, right? And the Canaanites are demonized. And he's not saying Palestinians are Canaanites. He's saying Palestinians have always been there, right? And there is no exceptional people. There are no chosen people. There are chosen people, it's called the human race, right? But there are no chosen nations, right? And what's interesting to me about what he writes, and he really knocks it down, he shows how British imperialism created the conditions for what became British Mandate Palestine, the Balfour Declaration, what happens in terms of the resistance to Arab nationalism and the development of the state of Israel itself. So let's think about externalization. So instead of at the end of World War II, German and Italian land being given to Jews, Ashkenazi European Jews, to create a state that they would be safe in, right? Palestine, right, was the solution, right? And many people will say, scholars of this, and I'm a social scientist, not a theologian, will say that Israel is the last European settler colonial project, right? And that it externalized the contradiction of anti-Semitism, which was core to European identity and culture and theology, right? By placing the work on Palestinians. And remember, in Israel, right? In Israel, Palestinians, right? Christians, Jews lived there for hundreds and hundreds of years, right? And the story we get about Israel is an Ashkenazi story about the Shoah, the Holocaust, right? Totally legitimate, right? In terms of what happened to 7 million, and they count knows, right? 10 million, 11 million people, right? Including 7 million Jews, right? In Europe, right? But the problem becomes like, why was the answer to create a state in Israel? What was that about, if not a project of European nationalism? So these are difficult things to talk about in the United States, right? Because, and this is, I'm gonna do a little psychoanalysis here. When the United States looks at Israel, it's looking at itself in the past. The United States is a genocidal country. It eliminated, tried to, the native population, it stole land, right? It created slavery as an institution, as an economic and then ideological institution. And the United States itself is one of the premier settler colonial societies. So when the United States, if the United States that were to question Israel, they would have to ask, well, what about this land? Right? What about these people? Right? And I think what we see is that the Israeli elites, right, and the United States elites are in a thrall, right? A genocidal thrall, in which the objects of their violence are the indigenous people of Palestine, right? So we have to deconstruct the theology at the heart of the American empire. What is the theology of the heart? It's called manifest destiny. That there was no people on these lands. It was, terra nullius, right? That it was empty, and that we took advantage of the land, the settlers. Same thing that gentrifiers say in inner cities, by the way. These neighborhoods were all messed up, and then we came and fixed it. These people didn't know how to use what was at their disposal. That is some serious bullshit, right? Ideologically speaking, but also the logic of settler colonialism, right? And let's look at the world, right? What are the settler colonial nations, right? Australia, New Zealand, nice place, but settler colonial, right? South Africa, clearly, right? Canada, and the United States, and the British in Northern Ireland. Right? What do those countries have in common? They're all Christian, Protestant, and Catholic nations. So even embedded in the theology of Christianity, is this settler colonial idea, right? So what I would say today, in terms of liberation theology, we have to begin to think about Palestine and the Palestinian national liberation movement as a key struggle in what will come next, right? What will happen next in this country and in the world. And now I'm going to get a little, I'm going to be a social scientist. I'm not going to bring the theology stuff at all. 1 million people died in this country. Most of them needlessly during the pandemic. And we know who died and in what quantities, right? Latinx people died like there was no tomorrow, in California specifically. And the climate is collapsing, right? The institutions are collapsing, right? What choice do you have for the presidential election? Trump and Biden. That's a dysfunctional ruling class, right? Biden, I don't know what's up with him. You know, I really don't know. I can't say. I'm not a Democrat. I'm, revolutionary socialist. But, and Trump, we know what's up with him, right? And so we have to start thinking about if fascism is growing in the United States, which is, people will say, it's horrible, we're gonna be losing our democracy in the United States. This ain't never been a democratic country. When the Constitution was written, most of the people were excluded, right? And if it's not a democratic country, what is it? It's a militarized oligarchy, that privileges a type of whiteness, right? And that retorts to its original form many times in history. Most of you, let's put it this way. The time between 1945, and let's say, just to put a timeline, 1975 in the United States saw an enormous social change. In terms of women's liberation, LGBTQ, gun liberation, Latinx liberation, Black liberation, ecology, women's liberation, right? All these struggles came up right after World War II. And it was different communities demanding that they be treated with respect and be given more of what we social scientists call the social wage, the benefits, the wages, all the things people need to live a productive life, right? And there was some progress actually. And it was a question of labor unions fighting, and civil rights, and women's liberation, the anti-war movement, all those things were happening. And this is the birthplace of liberation theology too, right? So that period was an exceptional period. The United States is now retorting to its original form, which is until 1965. I was born in 1964, right? The year after I was born, the United States no longer was a racial dictatorship by law. Until that point, it was a racial dictatorship, right after Reconstruction. How many read W.E. Du Bois's Black Reconstruction? Read that book, yo. It's like getting the Rosetta Stone, right? The key to Egyptian hieroglyphs. Because when you read that book, you will see his analysis. Like, actually, the people who won the Civil War were Black people being armed and fighting in that war. And then during Reconstruction, developing the 13th and 14th Amendment that gave us public education and also procedural and substantive rights within the law, right? Because after emancipation, Black people weren't citizens. They had to fight for that. So what I would say to you right now is, what is our liberation theology now? What's our liberation spirituality now, right? And if we're looking at the prospects of fascism, how do we resist that? How do we create communities of hope and communities of struggle, right? So part of the teaching today is, yes, there's a liberation theology. It's based upon this reinterpretation or good interpretation of the Hebrew Bible and also what we call the New Testament, but it's based upon practice, right? So remember, if you're Catholic, they will tell you have to believe these things in order to whatever. But actually what the liberation theologian said was, no, what you have to do is have right doing, right action, not just right theology. And so I think one of the things we can begin to think about is, how do we create the kind of communities where we can resist what's happening, reconstruct, and create alternatives, active alternatives to what's happening, and also look towards a type of sustainable future, right? It may be that our time is running out as a species. I hope that's not the case, right? I really hope that's not the case. But how are we gonna survive? How are we gonna create spaces of survival? And one of the models here is, to be honest, both the liberation theology movement in its various forms, but also the Palestinian National Liberation Movement, the resistance that they put up, right? So what do we do in a time of genocide, right? For me, as someone who's both a Christian and a Marxist, I think we're called to resist, but also to create an infrastructure where we can have a type of revolutionary, what I would call pastoral spirituality of theology. By pastoral, I mean taking care of each other, surviving, right? And I think what we're gonna see in the next couple of years is that the most important thing we can do right now is do a little bit of triage and do casualty reduction and create communities where we can have people move and how would we put this? In Spanish, it's replegue, tactical retreat. We need spaces of tactical retreat and formation where we can survive together. Right? I actually think people in the global south are more prepared for that than we are. But we need places like Ribera, right? We need other places. There's the Catholic worker people. They created a model, right? And there's all kinds of models that we can look at. There's our comrades in Jackson, Mississippi, Cooperation Jackson, that are creating sustainable economies, right? In Puerto Rico, we have a lot of people that are beginning to farm again, right? The old way, right? There's no reason for Puerto Rico to be importing rice. We still grow it on our own. So I think we're gonna have all those kind of combinations. And what liberation theology has taught me is that there are these traditions that we're all part of, but it doesn't have to be the way the tradition says, that there are revolutionary aspects to the tradition, that there are little spaces where you can reread those traditions and create new forms of being together with each other, right? I mean, that's really the idea of, in the New Testament or the Greek scriptures, a new earth and a new sky, that we're gonna create a new earth and a new sky. And when I was younger, all these Black revolutionary nationalists would always, we had a big, like, Malcolm X conference in 1989 in New York City, right? Everyone was into Malcolm X, right? I was into that guy, And I read all about Malcolm X, right? And one of the speakers, I'll never forget him, was Chokwe Lumumba, who was mayor of actually Jackson for a little bit. He was a Black revolutionary nationalist. And he said, the most important thing we can do for our people, he said two things really, is get out of the shadow of the plantation, or in our case, the shadow of the hacienda, right? And we need to free the land. I thought to myself, what's this guy talking about, free the land? I mean, what's this all free the land stuff? I don't understand that. I grew up as a city kid, right? I now understand what he was saying. He's saying we have to return to the land. We have to create spaces where people can grow. This here is actually a farm. It's a place where people can grow, where seeds can be placed and things can grow, right? So one of the things I would say, having spent time amongst peasant communities in Central America, is let's grow, let's do land, let's reinterpret the Bible. How do you do that? You look at the newspaper and you read the scriptures and you say, clearly God is on the side of the oppressed, right? And how do we create a spirituality and a theology out of that? The church and religion, they're institutions. They're like the Bank of America. You can analyze them. I mean, that's all they are. They're institutions, right? But faith and faith communities are where people grow, right? That we make the commitment to each other to continue collectively to develop each other spiritually and otherwise. My own faith community, the Fellowship of Affirming Ministry, wouldn't exist had people not gotten fed up in the very conservative Pentecostal holiness traditions and said, we're leaving, we're LGBTQ people, we can't stay and accept all this homophobia and transphobia, right? And they created a new space. My church was built in the living room of my bishop. And her wife was like, what do we do with all these people? And more people kept on coming and more young people came. I said, well, we gotta get a space, right? That's where they came from. They wanted to be affirmed in the spirit, loved, understanding God loves them, but not to deal with all the homophobia and transphobia in the more traditional Black spaces, right? So we have how many people here tonight? 1, 2, 3, 4. We have 9 people with 12 people, right? We could start a movement, right? So no me digan, don't tell me, oh, I don't know what to do. Let me tell you something. I'm going to end with a quote from my bishop because I don't want to talk forever. Bishop Barber, this summer, I don't know, do y'all know Bishop Barber from the Poor People's Campaign? Okay, he's a big brother, but he has a very severe form of arthritis. And he literally walks with 2 canes, right? And he was preaching to us, he would teach and then he would preach.
And Bishop Barber, he's from, I think, North Carolina. And he's a bishop in our church because no other church would ordain him in his tradition because he was too LGBTQ friendly, although he's a straight guy, right? Bishop Barber said to us, I'm a man who has many comorbidities. And at one point I started asking myself, why am I alive? All my friends, a lot of his friends died during COVID. So, and he took it to prayer and he said to God, Lord, why am I alive? Why did you, why are these really good people, why weren't they spared? And he said the answer to him was, well, you are alive, do something, right? Do something, right? So the message I have today is that liberation theology is what we do in faith communities of resistance that want to create alternatives, right? We all have our religious backgrounds and stuff, and some of it's good and a lot of it's crap, right? So we have to sit down and discern that's good, that's not good, right? And build these different communities. I think that's as much as I'm gonna say, and then we're going to do maybe questions. That'd be helpful. Or conversation. Yeah, that'd be good. I could say more, but I've talked a lot. What are people thinking? How are they feeling? I would encourage you to read liberation theologies, womenist theology specifically, feminist liberation theologies, and also Black liberation theologies and Latinx liberation theology and Latin American liberation theologies. And also to keep on thinking yourself, what is my spiritual autobiography and what does that have to do with liberation and freedom, right? Because the things that inform us, the things that help us are those things that can live in freedom and in discipline, right? All that faith is a discipline. Like for Viva to do this, she has to be disciplined. I'm sure there are days when she doesn't want to be disciplined, right? Like she wants to, but she's created, what has she done by being disciplined and building something? She's created a space of freedom for us and for herself, right? So one of the things I would encourage you to do is keep on asking yourself this question. What are the conditions under which we can reign with discipline, right? Not only like, Sister Mary Elephant, I'm talking about real discipline, like work, right? And freedom, that dialectic of freedom, right? Spiritual freedom, intellectual freedom, emotional freedom, and the discipline of working with other people together. So I'm gonna stop there. And why don't we have a discussion now? Does that make sense?
Thank you so much. If anybody has any questions, I'm gonna pass around the mic, so just raise your hand and I'll pass it to you and we'll take it from there. We'll just pass it back to him. So I know there was a lot to absorb and you guys are kind of formulating your thoughts. So we'll give it okay, someone's ready.
Thanks a lot, Edgar. I'm curious, I know there's a lot of different types of liberation theology, but since we're talking about Palestine, and to you, without trying to speak for all the different traditions, just for you and your understanding, what does it mean to pray coming from a liberation theology approach in light of everything happening in Palestine?
Right. What does it mean to pray? Okay, that's a good question. Thanks.
That's a great question. To pray for me is to understand that I'm a creature, that I'm a being that's in time and history. Because I don't ask God for stuff. God knows what I need, right? But to pray for me is to allow me to listen to those other voices. That's what it means. For example, let's think about it, right? Each one of you has at least a couple of ancestors that are always with you, right? That you're thinking about, people who've passed away, right? People who instructed you in faith. But I mean faith, I don't mean necessarily religion, I mean hope, right? Just keep on struggling, right? So when you pray, you also pray with them, right? So it's not that I pray for God to give me, the numbers to the lottery. I pray so I can listen to the voices of the dead, my ancestors, right? In the Yoruba tradition, we call it the Egu. In the Christian tradition, what do we call it? The communion of the saints, right? And I pray, in order to let God speak. You see, my mind is very occupied all the time. My time when I get to pray on my own, as opposed to pray collectively, which is a different thing, I allow that silence to teach me something, right? So silence is full. It's not empty. It's full of the voices of our ancestors, the voices of past struggles, the people we love, and God's voice, right? So in terms of Palestine, right, I pray that the Palestinian people be liberated, right? But also that we be liberated from our own attachments to imperialism, right? So in this moment of genocide, I think about my Muslim and Christian Palestinian siblings, and I unify my spirit with that resistance, right? And also the incredible dignity that people have in absolutely undignified conditions. Absolutely undignified conditions. And the poverty and sickness that must occupy the minds of the Israeli occupation forces and the elites that run it. How poor must you be intellectually, spiritually to do that, right? One thing that as I've gotten older, have accepted is there is evil in the world. And it's not random, it's structured, right? And we have to fight those evils. We have to fight those evils in ourselves, but in terms of the world as well. So for me, I can give you specific advice about prayer, but one thing that I would do, is that I like to do is to keep on asking God, how do I cooperate with you in this freedom project? How do I make myself vulnerable for it? Right? For me, personally, it was the struggle around HIV/AIDS and Black and Latinx LGBTQ people, right? And then I learned so much from that, and also the struggles today. So there's no praying outside of struggle. We pray within struggle. If that makes sense, I hope that makes sense. Other folks? Any students in the? Oh, Zoe, want to say something?
I need you.
So Zoe hates the professor.
Yeah, I hate Eric. That's all about all I have to say. I don't really have much to, in terms of questions for you. Thank you for speaking and for saying everything that you've said, and I appreciate the comments on prayer, and I think that was a good question as well, because I am not somebody who comes from a faith background, but I'm somebody who is like very interested in liberation theology, like academically and like personally. And so like having opportunities to have things like this kind of explained to me, it's like a very valuable thing. So I just appreciate even like little things being broken down that way, and kind of your response is like very enlightening to me. So
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
somebody take this from me. Thank you.
Thank you again for speaking. I grew up, like, my dad was kind of like a theologian, so he was like really into reading the Bible and different and he had like friends from different denominations. And one of the things that I remember growing up with was this idea of the Holy Land, the chosen land, the chosen
Right.
people, and it was always Israel.
Right.
And everybody was like, oh, Israel, like, I remember people, Latinx, I'm talking about Latinx people.
Right.
Immigrants, people that just came across the border, and this is what they thought. They thought like, we have to, one day, make a pilgrimage to Israel. And that was like a dream of many of the people that were into it. And, I mean, it's still very prevalent, it's still like very ingrained.
Right.
And I feel like a lot of our families, they just kind of see it as, well, that's what the Bible says. That's what the Bible teaches us, that this is the Holy Land, that this Israel is a chosen land, and so whatever they do justifies, justifies their actions. So I kind of wanted to hear what you had to say about specifically like how the Bible is used in order to program people into believing that this is okay, that genocide can be justified because the Bible says Israel is, so that's like one of the big things that like stands out in my mind, just because, I mean, my grandma, my dad, everybody was just like, Israel, para todo, it was like Israel, Israel, and I know that a lot of our communities don't speak out because of that.
Yeah.
Because it's just ingrained, and so I just wanted you to kind of speak on that.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Yeah, and this is one of the points that Dr. Rahed makes, is that he actually tells the story of this liberal German theologian. Dr. Rahed did his doctorate in Germany, coming to Jerusalem and wanting to be in the Holy Land, and not wanted to be in actual Jerusalem with their actual people. So I think one of the things that's happened is that, first of all, Israel as an entity has been invented, right? And then that nationalist project has been sort of projected into the Hebrew Bible, right? Saying this is Israel. I mean, even the question of David, King David, there's no archaeological evidence for that. Just to be like factual, right? So what we're talking about in a book like the book of Joshua, let's say, or in the Hebrew Bible, is things that people created as stories. And then the making of the Holy Land itself is again a Christian fantasy, right? An ideological fantasy, right? So when you say that, that land belongs to Israel, you've already engaged in Christian Zionism in one sense, right? You've excluded all these other people who were there just as long, if not longer, right? So I think that one of the things we need to start talking about with our folks is there is no Holy Land. All the earth is holy. We want to go that way, right? There is no special place, right? And how people frame it is important, right? Do you call the Alaska Mosque, or where, do you call it the Dome of the Rock? Right? What do you call it? Right? So we have to deconstruct the Christian Zionism in our own language, because they don't want to go to Israel to actually look at this settler state, the Palestinian condition, the fact they're Palestinian Christians, right? They have this really reified, like almost fantasy of what the Holy Land is. And I'm going to talk specifically about the US now. That fantasy is about this country too. That this is the holy country, that we are elected, right? And again, that's the deconstruction part. Our people have been the subjects of settler colonialism, right? Certainly colonialism, classic colonialism in Puerto Rico, right? And think about Texas, how the US stole that land, right? What did they do? They brought settlers in, they created fights amongst people, then they seceded and then invited the US Army there, right? That's classic settler colonialism, right? So what I would say in terms of our folks is we have to say to them, no hay tierra santa, solamente hay la tierra madre, la Pachamama, right? There's no holy land to speak of. There's just the land itself, right? And I think it's hard for our folks, once they get a very narrow interpretation of what the Hebrew Bible is, and what the Greek New Testament is, it's hard to get them out of that place, right? The Hebrew Bible is not history. It's a story. That's the first thing you have to say, right? And also that
whatever Jesus was, he was an occupied, colonized person. And that's where the identity should be, amongst the occupied and the colonized, right? But I think also, this is the other piece, that whole holiness, it's a business. I mean, there are pastors and priests that's their summer vacation, right? They go to the Holy Land with churches and stuff. And part of the Christian Zionist thing is what? And this comes back to the 19th century. They want all the Jews to be gathered. This is a fantasy. This isn't, into Jerusalem. So the end time can occur and Jesus will come, and there will be a judgment. And those who do not convert to Christianity, which is funny because Jesus is never Christian, will be eliminated. So what Christian Zionism really is, it's an exterminationist philosophy against Muslims and Jews. Because Muslims aren't going to be saved, and neither the Jews. Oh, they're the promised people, they're exceptional. But in the end, if they don't accept Christ, they'll be eliminated. That is some serious settler colonial nonsense, right? And think about all our native siblings, right? Indigenous siblings in Canada, the United States. The Catholic and Protestant churches created these schools where they took away their religion, took away their language, and cut their hair, right? So at the heart of it, and this is where we have to confront the violence, to say to our people, esa gente, those people hate Jews and Muslims. And they're only in alliance with them because they want that end time scenario to occur. And I'm loving whatever you guys are burning, it's sage or something, I love it. By the way, I hope that helps people. Other folks, thoughts, reflections, you don't have to have it, totally coherent. I certainly don't. Hey Marlene, this is Marlene
Hi, everyone. Sorry.
Ramos, who's one of my colleagues. She's from Cal State, Long Beach. I always want to say Long Branch. And she's a geographer. She's definitely someone who should do a teach-in here. And she does the geography of deportation. ¿Verdad?
Immigration detention.
Okay, here you go.
Yeah, I was going to comment, I haven't had a chance to snoop around social media too much, but I heard Bell Gardens passed a ceasefire resolution, which was very exciting. I'm from Bell Gardens. And yeah, and I guess I was trying to think about it the other day, but I was also very busy and I didn't really get far in my thoughts, but I was thinking about how Bell Gardens has now been historically, Bell Gardens and all the gateway communities started off as working class white towns. And then somewhere along the way, Mexicans came over and other Latinos came over and now they're ethnic enclaves. And it took me leaving, I guess, to realize that we were clearly in a segregated community, but it was also a very beautiful community. I don't know, I guess I was thinking a lot about what it means to be part of this immigrant community, and now the children of those parents that we grew up with, who are running city council, voted to stop the ceasefire resolution. And anyway, I felt kind of proud. I mentioned it to my students and kind of wish my mama was around. So she was really involved in politics when she first came here. And yeah, folks were running that little town, and I know I don't know if you guys know where Bell Gardens is, but there's a long history too of it being at some point corrupt or whatever, but what little government is not, so, or big government for that matter. But anyway, it's nice to meet you all. Sorry I was late. I wanted to bring Peanut with me, but she, anyway, I put her back.
And who's Peanut, Marty?
Peanut is I thought you guys maybe saw her because we were in the door. She's a pit bull.
Okay.
And it was too small. I think she would have been crawling over everybody's feet, and so yeah, she's back in the in the car. Yeah, it's nice to be here. Thank you for inviting me to the space. I don't have any thoughts about the ceasefire.
The resolution is,
Or
well, I mean, just to talk about that a little bit, right? Yeah. So what we're seeing now is a Democratic Party theater, right? So President Biden knows he's in trouble, right? He may definitely, well, I think he will lose Michigan, right? Because of what's happened, and Michigan has like 300,000 Muslim Arab Palestinian people. So what he did was, speaking of pit bulls, he loosened his pit bull from Brooklyn, Chuck Schumer, who's a devoted Zionist, and he split the difference. This is classic Democratic. He said, Chucky, probably, said, Chucky, look, why don't you go and tell the media that you disagree with Netanyahu and he's now a problem, they should have an election and they should take him out of office, right? Chucky said it, right? And remember, and this is the contradiction of what I would consider Ashkenazi Jews in the United States who have decided to become white, who have decided to identify with whiteness, right? Which wasn't always the case, right? And still not the case for a lot of Jews. They don't identify with whiteness, right? And I would encourage everyone to follow If Not Now, which is a wonderful activist group of anti-Zionist Jews, right? Who are really fighting the good fight in their synagogues, in their communities, and having real conversations, hard ones too. So we got to give a lot of sympathy to folks. So Chucky made that statement, and then Netanyahu, Bibi, he said, no way, we're going to go into Rafah, and if we need to kill people, that's fine, right? And I think what the Democratic Party is trying to do is have it both ways. Be very concerned about all the civilian deaths, build a bridge, which is really insanity. It's like out of a Fellini film, right? Except people are dying, right? And not have an actual ceasefire. Now, Blinken is trying to develop a ceasefire because, again, folks, it's not about Palestinian lives. It's about the Democratic Party fearing that it will lose the national elections. And therefore, there's a theater that's occurring, right? I don't know what will happen with the national elections. In 2016, I told my students at Columbia when I was teaching there, Trump's gonna win, right? And I don't know what's gonna happen this time. But I do know this, that in as much as, you know, people who are generally progressive, you know, who in this country on many issues, like Chuck Schumer, right? In as much as they facilitate that genocide, they are really pushing forward fascism in this country. Right? Because what's gonna happen is you're gonna have a lot of people, Black, Latinx, Asian, progressive white people who are gonna feel alienated from this kind of repression. Like Columbia University, I still teach at Columbia technically. They are literally repressing the students,
Yeah.
dissolving their organizations. There's gonna be a backlash. And so one thing I would say to my Zionist Jewish friends is look at your allies. Look at the people who are with you. And as we say in Spanish, right? Dime con quien tú andas y yo te diré quién tú eres. Tell me who you hang out with and I'll tell you who you are. And I'm telling you, the biggest threat to Jews in this country is the fascist movement that's taken over the Republican Party. It's not some Palestinian kids at Columbia organizing something. It's those fascists, right? And we should stop talking to them about fascists. We should say what they are. Neo-Confederates. That's what they are. They are new Confederates, right? And they want to resurrect the white republic. And that's their issue, right? And for the white comrades in the room, right? If you have relatives that are Trump supporters, talk to them. Talk to them. You're uniquely placed to say to them, look, don't be a nut, right? Let's talk about it. You know, I have a relative that's a Trump supporter. I love her to death, but I have talked to her and we continue to talk, right? But I think our white Euro-American comrades have a special obligation to fight at this time, right? And if you want a model of a radical Jewish militant revolutionary, read the recent biography by Susan Rebbe of Dr. Alan Berkman, who was a great doctor and a revolutionary who wound up in jail for his politics, a communist Jew guy, he would describe himself. And so my white comrades, remember Captain John Brown. You know, remember John Brown. right? There are models for resistance. So my thing of the ceasefire is the contradictions have become so hard for them that they have to do this media part, right? And I think they're in trouble. I think the Democrats are in serious trouble. I think ordinary working people in this country who are not with the Trump program will probably vote Democrat because they don't see any other choice, right? But I'm sure they're not happy about it, and I'm not sure the Democrats will win, right? I just want to make sure you guys are happy at the end of this thing. Other things we want. Yeah. My nibbly.
Thank you so much for the talk, by the way. I'm absorbing everything still. I have a couple things that I kind of want to externalize or else I'm gonna forget later. But there was like a couple of things that you were talking about during your presentation that I think are really critical for us to like kind of understand and realize our obligation as praxis, like people from this community, to really play out. Something you mentioned is that people of the global south are more prepared for like communal and like getting in touch because we cannot rely on anything from any corporation. And that's what's ruining everything. Our streets are being colonized, we're being gentrified. We can't trust the food that's coming in from the grocery store. We can't afford the food from the farmer's market. We can't trust any media that's being thrown at us, but we also can't trust big outlets, and everything is like up for interpretation basically. And we don't have that kind of, especially because we are at the core of the imperial hegemony. We have just been conditioned at such a young age from every aspect of our life, from the schooling system, from religion, from even the way that we modeled the white family from the 50s model. How to live in this isolated individualistic state. And so we have to deconstruct that way of thinking. And as a result of that, the people that are trying to get in touch with community and organize, one, we're burnt out and we don't have the resources or the time or the effort or the energy to connect with other people, let alone meet new people that are like trying to like survive at this end stage of capitalism. But it's also really hard because you stand out as a weirdo. Because it's not normal to be caring. It's not normal to want to protect other people, despite the fact that they may be like fucked up or did some shady shit, you know? That's right, I can curse, sorry.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
But like, obviously, you know me, like,
Yeah.
there's not a day in my life where I can curse.
Good. That's the Holy Spirit speaking through.
It is. No, but it's just like, what are some of the things that we can actually apply to like reach out to our fellow weirdos, you know, like.
Yeah.
It's hard because like when you would like, cause I'm Mexican American, I was born here, but like my heart and the way I grew up was like totally Mexican. Like your family, whoever can get in your face can tell you the most fucked up shit, and then you guys are still gonna be chilling, you know? There is like this reconcile, but there is this also understanding that people are inherently fucked up and not perfect, and that like regardless of the fact that they're in your community, you still have to show up and be there for them. And that kind of sentiment isn't natural, or it's not normalized here. Here we have this like kind of mentality to separate and like alienate ourselves from people that do us wrong, and obviously abuse, never like associate with abusers or anything like that, but like we just have this whole thing where it's like, oh, I could do everything on my own. I don't need help from other people. I'm gonna mind my business. I'm gonna, you know, like there's this isolation thing. And I feel like that disconnect is disconnecting a lot of people from what's happening in Palestine, but it's also preventing us from having actual conversations with people in our family community and such.
Yeah.
So like, how are just some ways that we can replenish ourselves with people in community when our community is like physically, mentally, emotionally not available to show up?
I don't think I have an answer to that question, first and foremost, right? Secondly, you know, thinking I think you hit on a lot of things that are important to think about, right? One thing I would say is this. One of the spiritual lessons I've learned over time is that when you're in a crisis, slow down, right? The logic of crisis is speed, right? And I think a place like this is a place to slow down. It's not a place to speed up, right? So I think one of the things you're talking about is loyalty to people in their process, even if they are messed up and say messed up things, right? The other thing is, this is the other thing I would say, the weirdos have to hang out with each other. They have to hang out, they got to date, maybe they have kids together, I don't know, right? The weirdos need to find each other and hang out and be with each other, because weirdos need their space. A friend, one of the organizers, I do a lot of work with the clergy and laity United for Economic Justice. We do a lot of work with labor unions, hotel workers and stuff. And one of the organizers, Adam, said that he was really devastated by what was happening October 7th and the genocide, and he's a Jew. He's a Jew. He said, and he is an anti-Zionist Jew, and he said, I'm having real problems talking to my family, you know, and all this stuff. And then he said, well, I found out that there are other Jews that agree with me now. And he has a little group that he calls the Rad Jews, and they all hang out with each other, right? Another, if not now, was started by a group of people deciding to have a Sabbath, Shabbos, on Friday nights, and they were all anti-Zionist Jews, and they got together, and after like they had 100 people, they said, maybe we should start an organization. So I think one of the things I would say is, when organizing should be in your interest, right? So it's important for the weirdos, the rats to hang out, but it's also important for us to take time out, right? Not to go with the logic of speed, right? And I think that's really important. I think one of the things that our religious traditions can afford us is a different relationship to time, right? One of my favorite theologians, William Stringfellow, you know, he would always talk about being a Christian is not being bounded to the time of death, right? That you live in a freedom, right? And in our tradition, it's the resurrection, right? The resurrection of all flesh, right? And I think that that's an important piece to think about the fact, what is time like? I think in the pandemic, we learned so much about time, right? How we use our time, what time is. And capitalism is predicated upon speed up, right? So we all need, I need to always resist the speed up, right? I need to figure out how to slow down. So I would say one way, you know, I don't have a complete answer, is get the weirdos to slow down enough to hang out, to love each other, and to talk to each other and support each other, if that makes sense, right? Other folks? Yes. Yes.
Sorry, I have to step out in a second, but I just wanted to say thank you so much. I like came into this not knowing a single thing about liberation theology. And feel like I learned a lot, took a lot of notes. And I'm just really grateful to like be in this space with like-minded individuals. And yeah, it was nice meeting all of you as well. Everyone take care. I'm just gonna step out. But just want to say thank you.
Thank you so much for coming. Come again. Great, great. All right, if we don't have any questions, should we wrap up? Yeah, right? Wrap up, we can do individual questions. First of all, I just want to thank all of you for coming out on a Thursday night. I know you have your date nights and stuff to do. And I really want to thank Viva and the folks here. I want to thank that gentleman back there who's been smiling. What's your name? Luis, how are you? That was my father's name. That was good to meet you, brother. And I want to thank the whole core Viva for creating this space. And please donate books. I know you got more books than you can read, and donate money to this space, because this is our space. This is Viva is our protagonista, and we need to support her and Luis and all the comrades who run this show to keep these spaces going. Okay,
Thank you.
thank you.
Big round of applause for Edgar. Thank you so much. I feel like we got a lot out of the talk, and you had a lot to share. I know it could be overwhelming, but we do have the recording, so if you want to revisit and just kind of replay it and share it, we'll have it up by tomorrow on YouTube and on our YouTube channel. So yeah, so you'll be there. You'll be able to see it again. And hopefully we can do this again later on in the year when you're available, and we can bring more discussion to the space about it. Maybe once the elections happen, or I don't know, we can just kind of regroup later on. But thank you again, Edgar. Another round of applause. Thank you so much. Have a great night. If you guys want to stick around and chat with him, that's great. If you guys want to look around at the books, support the store, it really helps us stay open, and thank you again. Have a wonderful night. Thank you.
I can close. Thank you for the name. Oh, thank you. Gracias.
I don't know if I was like, shit, I
Thank
I don't know what happened to your recording, but I checked on I tried to go to your Instagram and it didn't look like it was live. I did something wrong.
My fucking
Sorry.
cell phone. Luis, come on. Come on, man. I wanna.
I did the shout.
How are you? Good to see you. Good to meet you, buddy.
Nice to
You too. Yeah.
We guys-
We never met.
Oh.
We never met.
So Luis is a photographer, he's a really good friend of mine, and
Yeah.
he's a part of Centro CSO, who fights against police brutality. and
All
things like
right,
that.
brilliant.
So he's been
Brilliant.
doing that for like 10 years.
Oh, you're a veteran now.
Yeah, so he's really dedicated to that.
Are you on Insta?
Yeah,
What, what's your name?
probably.
Polaroid, okay.
So they just did a big action at the Oscars. They actually stopped the Oscars, like they installed it for like a couple hours, right?
6 minutes.
Like,
Good
they
for
installed it
you.
for Hours for some reason.
Well, that's the longest it's ever been delayed.
Excellent.
Yeah.
I'm honored that you came. You're here with us. Gracias, mi hermano.
It's kind of a mess. You can try to go in. But 8:30, yeah, you can go ahead. It's all right. Yeah, I'm okay with it. You know. Okay. Yeah, it's kind of dark here too.
Okay, oh, you find light.
Yeah, sorry. No,
I wanted to ask if you guys have any volunteers or anybody here. I don't know what